right. So just to recap, ladies and gentlemen, what we did in the past. Setting up your meeting for like 2. Done. All right. Just to recap what we have done in the past, what were we speaking about? In the past, what we were speaking about in the past is we were talking about a bunch of souls. So we spoke about the idea that we discussed about the concept of a tzaddik, of a Beinoni, of a Rasha. It defines the characters of the tzaddik, Beinoni, and a Rasha. We spoke about the idea that we don't get measured by our actions, but rather we get measured by our tendencies. That the tzaddik has a tendency of only wanting to do good, the Rasha has a tendency to do bad, and the Beinoni depends on his day, and sometimes yes, sometimes no. Now, just to remind you that a Rasha doesn't mean bad. It means weak. That he has a tendency to do things that he shouldn't be doing, not because he's bad, but because he's weak. He doesn't have that strength to stand up against the negative, to stand up for what's right. He sort of just goes with the flow and lets himself do whatever happens. So the Beinoni also has struggles. The Beinoni and the Rasha both have struggles. So what's the difference? The difference is that the Rasha gives into his struggles and the Beinoni holds himself back from his struggles. So to understand the battlefield, over the next 7 chapters, we're going to discuss the design of the soul. And first, we're going to speak in today we're up to chapter 2. Chapter 2 to 5, we'll speak about the godly soul, and then 6 to 8, we'll speak about the animal soul. So we're going to speak about the fact that every soul has 3 components. There's the essence of the actual soul, which is something in relationship to itself. So you have the essence, the body, and the expression. So the essence, as we said, is something in the relationship itself. The body of the soul is the way it functions, the emotional, the intellectual, the actual. And then you have the expressions, which is the way it connects to the outside. So what we're going to talk about in this chapter, we're going to discuss the essence of the soul. So we have 2 souls. We spoke about the soul last week, about the natural soul or the human soul. And then we have the soul, which is called Chelek Elokam Imal, Mamash, a little piece of God. And this changes the entire focus of our service of Hashem. Because what conventionally we thought that what was the battle that we had, the battle was going to be between good and evil. That I have to, either there's good or there's evil, and I need to choose and work out which one am I going to do. But what we see over here now is that it's not between good and evil, but the war that we have now is between natural and unnatural. Meaning that we used to think the challenge was a war between the good inclination versus the bad inclination. What's the inclination? A tendency, a mood, a disposition. So if I'm in a good mood, I'm going to do good stuff. I'm going to go daven. I'm going to go learn. I'm going to do mitzvahs because I'm in a good mood. And what if I'm in a bad mood? Well, I'm not going to do good stuff. And not only will I not do good stuff, maybe I'll start doing negative stuff. So that's what happens if we have, there's a streak inside of us which wants to be bad and do the wrong stuff. And then we have a streak inside of us which wants to do the good stuff. And what we have to do is we have to have that war, so to speak, to decide what we're going to do. So we said what's the battle? It's between these 2 things, the Yetzer Tov, which we call the good inclination, and the Yetzer Hara, which we call the bad inclination, or the evil inclination, sometimes even. So it seems that was sort of, I don't know, schizophrenic, bipolar, unstable, something like that, where we sort of don't know exactly, like, am I this, am I that? Well, what exactly am I? If I'm this one thing, that's what we had in the parsha a few weeks ago, where Rivka, the wife of Yitzchak, of Isaac, was pregnant, and she went to find out what is going on inside because she felt the struggle. The Medrash tells us that whenever she went outside a place of goodness, it felt like the baby was trying to get out. And whenever she went past a place of idol worship and bad stuff, it felt like the baby wanted to come out. And she's like, oh my goodness, I have a problem over here. Which one is my son? Is he confused? And she went to the tzaddik, she went to Shem, and he said, no, the kid is not confused because you're actually having twins. And therefore one is going this way and one of them is going that way. There's a great story of, his name is Rabbi Gordon. I'm not sure if he was the father of Rabbi Gordon from the Valley or the grandfather. But basically, he was conscripted to the army. And then you go through the psych evaluation. So he's going through the psych evaluation. And they start asking him, tell us about yourself and stuff. So he says, well, you see, inside of me, there's these two things, and there's a good one and a bad one, and trying to fight with each other, and they said, he said, have a nice day, see you later. Such people we don't really need around here. So what the Alter Rebbe is introducing to us over here is an entirely new thought. Because what the Alter Rebbe is teaching us is that we have two souls. It's not that we have two inclinations. We have two totally complete souls, which means two totally complete personalities. It's not that I'm in a good mood or I'm in a bad mood. It's that it's either this soul or it's that soul. Which soul am I listening to? We have the natural soul, which comes with all its properties and all its tendencies of a natural soul, which means I'm going to do stuff which is more physical, right? The human soul is more mortal. It's more self-aware. It has the ego. There's a survival instinct. So I'm going to take care of myself before I take care of others if I'm going to be following my natural soul, because naturally it makes sense to be like that. But if I'm going to be following my godly soul, the godly soul is quite the opposite. The godly soul lives forever. This godly soul is not focused on self. It doesn't have an ego. It has humility. It's not there to say, oh my goodness, I have to survive and I'm going to push everyone else around in order that I could survive. The godly soul says, that's it. It's fine. Things will be okay. I'm here to serve. So the godly soul it's a part of God. It's present here on earth in order to serve the earth, to make the world a more godly place, so that over here, Hashem will feel comfortable at his home in its lowest creation. That this world is the lowest creation. When we learn the Kabbalah, we had the 4 different worlds. Our world is the lowest creation of the worlds. And so therefore, what we have over here is we have that we want to make over here a world which is a place where Hashem will feel comfortable, and that's what the mission of the godly soul. And we refer to this soul every morning. We say Elokai Neshama. It's the second paragraph of davening. It starts on page 5, and 5 or 6. Is it 5 through 12 or 6? It's 5, page 5. It starts on page 5. Elokai Neshama Hashem, this soul that you gave to me, Tahurahi. It's either 5 through 13 or 6 through 12.
No, Elokai Neshama.
Okay. So this soul that you gave to me, you created it, you formed it, you breathed it into me. So we speak about the soul that Hashem breathed into me. That's the way we call the neshama, that it's not of the earth, it's of God. So basically what we have over here, as the verse says in the book of Iyov, the book of Job, that the godly soul is a chelek elokah, it's literally a piece of God. Now, what's the difference between a piece of God and a creation of God and everything in this world? Because everything in this world, we've always said, is part of Hashem. So we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But the idea is that when Hashem gives us, okay, so by the creation of man, it says, when Hashem created Adam, it says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, that Hashem breathed into Adam, he breathed into him a soul. What's the difference? The Zohar says, what do you mean breathe? We have all the other parts of creation. Vayomer Elokim. Hashem said, let there be light. And Hashem said, there should be the sun, moon, and stars. Everything is Hashem said. All of a sudden, we come over here, creation of man. And what does it say? And Hashem breathed into him. So the Zohar discusses what's the difference between breathing and speaking. Breathing is a much deeper energy. If you're going to blow a balloon, for example, how many balloons can you blow up before you run out of breath? And how long can people talk for? People can talk forever. And we all know people who do that. So talking is easy. It's more of an external, it's coming from the inside, but it's more external. Whereas breathing, it comes from internal. And therefore, that's the reason why the expression is used is breathing. Now, even though God obviously doesn't breathe, it's a anthropomorphism, meaning taking physical human-like behaviors and referring it to Hashem. But that's the idea used versus the creation of the world. The creation of the world was with the Asara Ma'amarot, is with the 10 utterances. Or we have the Aseret Sadibros, the 10 sayings that Hashem did. So the sayings created beings, but the creation isn't Hashem's words. So when Hashem said, let there be light, and there was light, okay, let's say something more physical. Hashem said there should be a tree. So the tree was created from the word of Hashem, but the tree is not the word of Hashem. It's more external, even though it comes from Hashem. Whereas the breath is the person that is the soul. The inside of us, we are the breath of Hashem. Our neshama is the breath of Hashem, as opposed to the tree, which is created from the saying of Hashem. So that would be the difference between a creation and between the soul. The soul is something which comes from much deeper inside. A different type. Correct. It's not the same soul as a person. We can use the word soul, but it's not really a soul. It's not a neshama. It's a nefesh. It's a life force. Thank you. It's something that animates it. Everything in life everything in the world has a life force to it, but it's not a neshama. It's a different style of life force. So we leave our mark on everything that we come in contact with. Everything, wherever I go, whatever I do, I'm always leaving my mark, whether it's on people, whether it's on items. What do they say? When you go hiking, leave only footprints, take only memories, something like that, right? So we don't want to make too much impact in certain places. But wherever we go, whatever we do, whoever we talk to, whoever we come in contact with, we're always going to be leaving our mark in a certain way. But what's the biggest impact that we have? The biggest mark that we have, that's going to be a child. Because the child doesn't just carry our energy, the child also carries our identity. You give the parable, like I'm a great artist and I make these amazing paintings and I sold this painting for, I don't know, $50,000. You know what painting it was, right? You know what artwork it was. It was the banana with the masking tape. No, but you have an artist and he spends his time and he makes a beautiful, beautiful artwork worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he sells it and he's very, very proud because it took him months to create this masterpiece. And he goes into somebody's house. Then he finds out that, unfortunately, there was a fire in that house and the masterpiece was burnt. He's devastated because it's terrible. He spent so much time and now the masterpiece is no longer there. However, after a bit of time, he'll get over it. Okay, time to make a new masterpiece. Yes, it's not just about the money that he got from the painting. Mm-hmm. It's the idea that he worked on something, and now his work. There's a child of mine who gets very frustrated when he's helping me, and what did I say? There was this meme going around. In the men's bathroom, in the men's restroom, there's a sign with instructions of how to wash your hands. It's pretty pointless because men don't read instructions. So I'll be busy making something, doing something creative, but putting something together. And then halfway through, I'm like, okay, whoops. Okay, let's go back 2 steps because it didn't really work. The way we did it, we have to do a bit different. And he gets frustrated. He says, what a waste of my time. We shouldn't have done it like that. But in life, sometimes this is the way things happen. So getting back to where we were talking about is the idea that, yes. So the idea that, so this artwork, it's gone, and I'll be upset for a while and then I'll move on. However, if God forbid there's a child, if somebody, God forbid, loses a child, they'll never get over it. They're always going to be upset for the rest of their lives. So that is the difference, so to speak, when we say that Hashem imparted sort of a continuum of identity into us, that is our core. When Hashem breathed into us, this is very different than the way Hashem created other things. So if Hashem breathed into us the neshama, and therefore we all have the same soul, seemingly we're all going to be equal. But if you look practically, you're going to see that people are very, very different. Everyone's so different. So where do these differences come from? And you can say it works the same way with a parent. That when a parent has a child, the child starts off from the seed of the father, and that has in essence of it every single part of the body. But then what happens? It changes. And in the mother's womb, it changes from being one thing to all the different levels. You have the head, you have the heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, all these other wonderful parts of the body, which you could probably tell me more about all the different parts that there are. But ultimately, it's all coming from the same thing, but it's spread out. And that's sort of the idea that we're going to have with when it comes to the child, to the Jewish people. And therefore, we are going to discuss the relationship between us and Hashem. We're going to use the example, the analogy of a child. That's when we have the child. So how does a child born? A child is born, a child is coming from, so to speak, the brain of the father, right? There's the thought, there's the experience, everything is passed through. It starts off with that thought from the father, and then from there comes a child. So too, our neshama comes from the essence of Hashem, which in Kabbalah is called Chachma. And we're going to discuss that, the idea that there's the relationship between a parent and a child, of the neshama to Hashem and neshama to neshama. Because if we're all a piece of Hashem, as we just said, then we have to find out how can we have differences. So we're going to say there are a few different differences that we have with a child, that we're going to use that and bring that over to the analogy we have with Hashem. So a body has a bunch of different organs. The fact that you're going to have a heart, a lungs, and a foot, it doesn't mean that each part of the body is coming from a different source. It all comes from the same source. However, what happens? In the womb is where it develops, which is sort of an external part of our original seed. And over there is where it's going to develop into all these different parts. And we'll touch on that a little bit soon. But also is the idea that a child is always going to remain connected to the parent. The father, the child has similar behaviors or mannerisms and stuff like that. And so the child is always going to remain connected to the father. It doesn't matter, even though the child has now moved on, right? Now you're going to say, okay, so which part? So we spoke about the brain, so maybe it's only the brain of the body. What about the other parts of the body? How are they connected, right? Because we said behaviors, mannerism, that's all based on psychological, philosophical. So what about the other parts? So where does my finger get its life force from? It comes from the brain. It relies on the brain for its life force, for its movement, etc., to tell it what to do, to the feelings. And therefore, we can see that every single part of the body is still connected. So now that we have this, now we're going to look at this as a metaphor of the godly soul. We can all be parts of Hashem, but we can also be different. Because if we're all connected, and we're all one organism, so therefore we're all going to be part of Hashem. And just because there are different souls and people are different, it doesn't mean that there's different sources. Just like the limbs of a child, there's a lot of different types of limbs that we have, but it's all part of the same child. And just like the baby evolves, and as it's growing, so too, the soul is also going to evolve. We'll speak more about that later on in chapter 36. And one more thing, and this is a very important one, is just like a child, after the child develops, the child still maintains its inner identity and the connection to the father. And so too, every single Jewish soul, it doesn't matter about our level of divine awareness. Our soul still retains its inner connection with its source, which is Hashem. As it says it's going to be united with an amazing, strong connection the way it was at the very beginning. So the connection that a soul has with Hashem doesn't change, even though it came down and down and down and down. But what happens is that in the process of the soul being born, when it leaves its lofty perch up there where it was with Hashem, and it comes down through the chains of different worlds, as we've discussed, we mentioned it previously, there's Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya. There's all the different levels, and each world has the 10 spheres. So there's a lot of different levels from where the soul starts until it comes all the way down into this world. And as it's going through this chain of worlds, it's going to get affected by them. So by the time it gets down into the body, it had some major transformation. It doesn't look the way it once looked. It doesn't function the way it once functioned. It's lost some of the qualities that it used to have, some of the sensitivity, some of the wisdom. Basically, it was traumatized during birth. Every birth is traumatic, even the good births are. So the soul as well, right? And so the Alter Rebbe compares this soul to the fetus developing in the womb. And if we trace it far back enough, as we said, we get to the brain of the parents. But what's born from this original brain stuff of the father is not another brain. It's another human being. What does that mean? It means that a human has a fetus. So it means that a human means a fetus with a brain, but it also means a toenail as well. The fetus means it has a brain. A human has a brain, it has arms, legs, and it has a toe. The toenail doesn't come from a different source. It also comes from the brain stuff. But what happened? In the 9 months of pregnancy, of gestation, it undergoes transformation. And now there's no question that even the toenail is rooted and originates from the same source as the brain of the fetus. It's the same, it's made of the same stuff. And the creation of the toenail is just as much of a miracle as the brain, as the of birth as the brain is. So there's always this connection of the child being born to the parents, even if it's just a toenail. So now we're going to say the same is true with the souls. Every soul originates in Hashem's thought, so to speak. In the process of birth, it undergoes some changes, but it's not the essential stuff that changes. It doesn't become ungodly; it just functions less godly. So, based on this, well, even as better, so the change in the child is sort of an outside force from where it's originated from. It's in an outside location. So to speak, as we said, the essence of the soul of the neshama is coming from high. It's, as we said, it's which is literally a part of Hashem. So this soul over there, the essence, it doesn't change. It's as it comes down through all these chains of worlds over there, that's where it's able to change, and we have all these different levels, so to speak, of the souls. And that's why, even though the souls of our generation are much inferior to the previous generations, we are still capable of serving Hashem with a sincere and genuine service, because it's the same essence. The essence didn't change. So therefore, even though we may be on a lower level than 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, but the essence is still the same. And so that's why we're able to still, so to speak, be on a higher level. Will we reach that highest level that they had? Not necessarily, but we can still genuinely want to and are capable of serving Hashem the way we are now, because the essence is the same. How is it the same? Because you might think that just like in a child, you might think that only the brain is connected, which means that maybe only the tzaddiks of the generation are going to be connected. But what about us? If we're like the fingernails, are we really connected to Hashem? So the Alter Rebbe stresses that, yeah, just like in a child, that every part of the body relies on the brain, and therefore every part of the body is connected, so too the Jewish people, we are all connected with each other. We're all connected to the brain. And then, the leader of the Jewish people, what's it called? It's called the Rosh B'nai Yisrael, the head of the Jewish people. In fact, the word Rebbe in Hebrew is spelled Rebbe, Resh Beis Yud. That's an acronym for Rosh B'nai Yisrael. So the leader, usually we use the word the head. Okay, it's like the leader. But in this context, what we're saying over here, that a Rosh B'nai Yisrael is not just the leader, but when we're talking about the different levels, like the different parts of the body, we could say that the leader is sort of like is literally like the head as opposed to the lower levels. So, because we have a connection to Hashem, so we have a connection to the leader of the generation, to the leaders, and they are the heads of the generation. So what about that? That's why it's important for us to connect to the leader, because it's through the leader that we get our life force. And then you're going to say, well, what about there are certain people who don't feel the connection? What about some people who rebel? What about they speak bad about the tzaddik? Are they still getting their connection to the rosh, to their head? The answer is yeah. The Torah explains in chapter 22 that they're getting it through Bechinas Achirayim, which is basically the idea that when I serve Hashem, when I like somebody, so I'm going to face them, I'm going to show them a beautiful face, a nice face, and be smiling and happy and very nice, and I'll do whatever it is that they want. What happens if there's somebody who I have to give them something? However, even though I need to give them something, I don't want to give them something, but I have to give it to them anyway. Let's say you fire a worker for doing something egregious, but you still have to give them the last paycheck. So you don't want to give it to them, but you have to give it to them. And therefore, it's sort of like, you sort of throw it over your shoulder, so to speak. I'm not looking at you here, take it. I have to give it to you anyways. So somebody who doesn't connect to the head is going to still get their life force, but it's sort of not from the positive way. And it's sort of like, let's say one day you wake up and your toe says, I don't like the brain. I want to be disconnected from the brain. That's it. I don't want anything to do with you. It doesn't matter. At the same time that the toe is saying, I don't want to be connected to the brain is still getting the toe is still getting its life force from the brain. So it's called gangrene. Yeah. So, at the same time, when somebody may be like not interested in connecting to the Rosh is still davening and thinking about them and davening about them. There's a verse in the Torah. The Torah says "Uladav kabay," that we have to cleave to Hashem. What does it mean to cleave to Hashem? So the Gemara explains that if you're going to cleave and connect to the Talmidei Chachamim, it's as if you connected to the Shechina, to the Shechina Mamash. So connecting to the tzaddik is really connecting to our true identity. Because if the tzaddik is going to be the Rosh, if the tzaddik is going to be the head, right, and we're all other different parts of the body, and the head is more cognizant or more aware of the fact of its connection, because the head has the brain. So therefore, if we connect to the head, then that head is more connected, then we have a much greater connection to the source, which is Hashem. Just like the brain has more of a connection to the parent than the toe does. So, and if you think about it, there are two ways of looking at the world. And it's very important. Like sometimes people like, oh, well, what about this and what about that? Your frame of reference is very important with how people look at things. You look at anything that's going on, whether it's politics or current events in the Middle East or wherever it is, depending on how people look at things, depends on how things go. So in Chassidus, the question is, what is real and what is a new concept? Is godliness real and the world just happened to be created and therefore we deal with the world? Or is the world real and we have to work out how we can connect to Hashem? So when I look at something, what lens am I looking at it with? Am I looking at it as the lens of Hashem is what really counts? Now, where does this fit in? Because I know that Hashem is real. I know the Torah is real. Whatever it says in the Torah is 100% true and 100% accurate. Now, this thing that I'm looking at, how does that fit into Torah? Or do I say, well, the world is real, or science, or whatever it is real. Now, how does I fit Hashem into this idea? So most of us, when we look at things, if I'm looking at my cup of water, what am I seeing? I'm seeing something which I can have a drink, and I'm going to ingest it, and it'll quench my thirst and moisten my parched lips. And it's good. It's great. What is it? Another way to look at it? This is a creation from Hashem. Hashem created water. Hashem wants us to use the water to make a bracha on it and use it in order to give us energy or make us more comfortable in order that we can learn better. Which is my instinctive thought process. For most of us, it's that, okay, it's a drink. I want to have a drink. I'm thirsty. That's just sort of the way we have trained our minds to think. A tzaddik, on the other hand, a tzaddik sees things more on a spiritual level. So when it makes sense that the tzaddik sees things like that, because the tzaddik is like the head. The tzaddik sees things from a brain perspective, not from a pinky perspective. So what we see from what was said over here is we see three things. We see the importance of connecting to a tzaddik. We also see the importance of Jewish unity because we are all part of one body. At the same time, we see Jewish diversification because we're all parts of the same body, but we're all different limbs. And so because we're all different limbs, we could be different, but we're still needed. For example, you have, Sephardim and Ashkenazim. And in Sephardim, you have, the Syrians and the Iranians and the Iraqis and the Yemenites and the Moroccans, all these different. Is one of them more right than the other? No. Ashkenazim, Sephardim, every group is just as right as the other. But they're not the same. We're all different. It's when the Jewish people left Egypt, it says that there was when the sea split, it wasn't just into two, but it was split into 13. One for each of the 12 tribes, and then one for everybody else. It didn't fit into those 12. So there were different groups of people. Even in the desert, it says that there were different styles of prayers that each tribe said, because each tribe, each of the Shvatim were different. So, and they had a different style and a service of Hashem. So it's not that, you need to be like me or they need to be like them. No, we're able to have diversification and still all be good. And we see that if we're all limbs of the same body, the arms, I don't want my arms to work like my legs. That would be a problem. I need each thing to work the way it needs to work. And at the end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the fact that parents have an influence in the way the godly soul is going to interface with the animal soul and with the outside world. And that depends on the behavior of the parents. There was a big Hasidic master, his name was Uri Straselish, and he was called the Saraf. He was like the fire, like the big special guy. He was a very, very big tzaddik. And he said, it would have been much easier for me to be able to be the way I should be, the way I am now, if my father would have gone to mikveh even once. Because then my father would have been on a holier level, a more pure level, and then it would have helped for me. So the parents didn't decide his soul, because his soul is the soul of a tzaddik. But he says it could have been easier if his parents would have been different. So parents don't decide the actual soul, even though as we said, if the child is coming from the thought of the parents, so then whatever the father's thinking at the time will change and make an effect on the child. So that's exactly what he was saying, that a parent who's in a different mindset will be able to make us and help the child and make the child different, but not that the parents decide the actual soul. Because, and if you have a look, you can see that you can have great souls that are born to mediocre parents or simple parents, and sometimes even evil parents are going to have, you have Lavan, who was evil, and you have Rachel and Leah, who were great. You have Besuel, who was evil. You have Rivka, who was great. So, even Abraham, right? Abraham, his father was a major idol worshiper and stuff like that, and Abraham turned out pretty good. So how does that work if the parent has an effect on the child? And the answer is because the soul isn't affected by the parents. When the Zohar says that the parents make a difference to the child at the time of conception, it's referring to the garments of the soul, but not the soul itself. And therefore, parents are going to sanctify themselves. They provide sanctify themselves at the time when the child is being conceived. They provide a more sensitive garment for the soul. And those who don't, it's more of a coarse garment for the soul. The soul itself has its own destiny. And the parent's holiness or lack thereof is not going to change the godliness of the soul. But what it does do is it gives the soul a head start to a softness, sensitivity, to a responsive garment. And that will enable the child to be able to react and respond to things which are godly, which are holy, without resistance. And so it's not the soul itself, it's the garments. And when we speak garments, and we're going to explain later more about garments, but we're primarily talking about the garment of thought, because there are three garments. There's thought, speech, and action. And that's the way the soul expresses itself. So the soul can communicate by itself through thinking. It communicates with others by speaking. And it communicates with other entities, with other objects through acting. And that's how the soul expresses itself. But primarily, it's the garment of thought which is going to determine the quality of the child's life. You have some kids who look for the negative. Whenever something's bad, if there's ever trouble, you always know, okay, that kid's probably there. He's involved over that. You have certain kids that would everything negative or anything bad or anything trouble, they're always sort of gravitating towards that. And some kids are the opposite. Whenever something help is needed, that kid's always there. Whenever there is something good happening, the kid's always part of it. So what is that? That's based on the garment of thought. And in this world, we have a freedom of choice. And what happens is the ungodly seems as good as the holy. And the holy seems as optional as the bad. So if that's the case, we're sort of confused a little bit as what exactly is going on. Because if there needs to be an equilibrium or equal of good and bad. Because if there'd be too much of one, then the world we wouldn't have a free choice. And we never have a free choice. So therefore, as we said, things that are ungodly, they seem good, because if only holiness looked good, then I'll only do godly stuff. So therefore, you have to have other stuff. We see, it's not a bad thing. Well, what's wrong if I do this? And what's wrong if I do that? And holy stuff is like, yeah, I could go to shul, I could not go to shul. I could daven, I could not daven. These things also seem to us as options. And a wise man once told me, he said, instead of asking when you're trying to decide what to do, don't say, well, what's wrong with this? Always say, what's right about it? And we use that perspective, because what's wrong with it? There's most things that are bad or that are not so great. Well, what's wrong with it? There's nothing really wrong, intrinsically wrong with it, but there's nothing right about it either. So when we look at if we use the lens of, well, what's good about it, it's going to help us make much more, giving us more clarity when we want to make our moral decisions. So getting back to this idea, when a godly soul is born, is going to tip the world towards good, because it's making more goodness and more holiness in the world. And what happens if too many great godly souls are born? It could sort of, so to speak, take away our choice of freedom, a freedom of choice. Because now it's like, what do you mean? Look around. There's such an influence of goodness. It's like, well, of course I'm not going to do the wrong thing. So the Arizal mentions that the Klippa tries to send great souls to, so to speak, low spiritual level conceptions. So that way the soul won't realize its greatness. And we mentioned some before. And, we spoke about Avram, we spoke about Rivka, but even, Mashiach does not come from a wonderful pedigree. Mashiach comes from the daughters of light. That after, what? It comes from the daughters of light. And they were, he comes from the union between a father and daughter. And then go down a little bit. And you have the story of Yehuda, when Yehuda and Tamar. And through Yehuda being with Tamar, what happened from there? From there, you have the Peretz, which is the grandfather Mashiach. And even David HaMelech wasn't the one of the top sons. He was sort of he was the outcast of the family. So you have a lot of different levels and stuff, different ways, and in Rus, the soul was not even in the Jewish people and came into the Jewish people. But so you have all these different levels in order to try and sort of stop Mashiach coming, or to stop it being from a positive way, and to make it sort of try and push the goodness into the negative. And the Arizal mentions the idea that when goodness is not used, then when it leaves the world, the forces of impurity, the Klippa, is able to sort of grab onto it and get their nourishment from it. So therefore, they do not want goodness to be used in this world in order that they can get their nourishment. So therefore, they try and push these souls into places where their goodness will never be realized and actualized, and therefore they're able to use it. So this, of course, the fact that, well, it's not my fault. Well, what do you want from me? It's my parents, they caused, sort of made a problem for me. But no, it's just the garments. Garments can be cleaned. Obstacles can be overcome. Our parents don't influence the soul that we get. Our parents just get the garments of it. And therefore, we need to strive for greatness because of, or in spite of, our parents. So the idea behind the soul we're talking about in the souls over here is the idea that what the parent has an effect on the child, but that's more the garment, more the outside. The inner part of the soul it's the essence of the soul is so great and so holy, there's nothing that is able to do to change it. So to summarize what we spoke about today, we spoke about that every Jew is embodied in the essence of Hashem, just like a child is embodied in the job of the parent. But the difference between us, it's all superficial, because as he said, the change took place out, so to speak, outside the strong godly force. Just like the child's growth also was outside of the father, but essentially we all share the same identity, and therefore we're all going to be connected. And then we spoke about the idea of our link to our identity with Hashem is strongly related to our connection with the tzaddik. And we spoke about the fact that when Hashem blows, we said that the neshama was blown into the vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. It was blown into the soul. That it was not just speaking. We said there was between speaking and speaking more external, whereas breathing is more internal. And interestingly, it says he breathed the soul into him, and he was the nefesh chaya, to a living soul. And that's using the word nefesh, not neshama, which you were saying, every living thing has. So why does it say that nefesh chaya, which is sort of like animals also have nefesh chaya? So one of the answers to this is it's trying to teach us that when Hashem gives the neshama, yes, Hashem breathed into us the neshama, so we have that much stronger connection. But nevertheless, but still, it's the nefesh chaya that we have to make, and the trajectory of our neshama. Where's it going to be? Are we going to focus on the vayipach, the fact that Hashem blew into us, and we have that strong internal connection with Hashem, or are we just going to be nefesh chaya? We'll just be like one of the other animals, one of the other creations. So we always want to remember what we should try and focus on. And we are all not just, so we have that strong connection with Hashem, and then all these souls, all the Jewish people, we're all parts of one body. So we'll end off with a story. There was a chassid, his name was Manya Munyanson. And he lived probably 150 years ago or so, in the times of the Rebbe Rashab. And the Rebbe Rashab at the time was speaking about how amazing the not just the Torah scholars are, but even the simple Jews are amazing and they're great. And he was extolling their virtues. And he said to the Rebbe Rashab, I don't see it. Because the Rebbe Rashab said, even use the expression that he is pile plois, that he's a wonder of wonders. They're just amazing, great stuff. And so he said, I don't see it. So he said, you don't see it, but it exists. Anyways, a while later, this chassid was a diamond merchant. So the Rebbe Rashab said to him, do you have any diamonds with you? And he said, do I have diamonds? Sure, I have diamonds with me. And he took out a bunch of diamonds and he put them on the table. And the Rebbe Rashab looks at them and says, oh, they look like glass. Like there's nothing special. They don't look special to me. Like, what's so great about them? So he says, Rebbe, you don't understand. To really appreciate a diamond, you have to be an expert. And the Rebbe Rashab said, exactly. To really appreciate a neshama, you have to be an expert. And when you are an expert of neshamas, then you're really able to appreciate the level of a neshama. And as we've been saying in the last parak, in the last chapter last week, and we're going to keep saying, and as we continue, that we're not born in a certain way, it's how we act. So you can have somebody who is not doing the right thing, but all the time, but when they are doing the right thing, it's a major challenge for them, and they're trying their best. And there's all those other times where he held himself back that you don't see. You only see the times when he doesn't, but you don't know what's going on internally. So people have a lot of challenges, a lot of stuff, but every time we hold ourselves back, we can be on the level of a Beinoni, which is we won that war. So if we, as we said last week or 2 weeks ago, the idea that every moment, every decision we make is a mini war, and every time we win that specific challenge and that desire, we now have won the war, and we are on a very high level. 5 minutes later, we have another challenge. Well, that's a separate thing. Will we win or will we not? Hopefully we will. And if we fall, then we could be like the Russia at that moment. And at the next time we win, then we go back up to the Beinoni. There's a story. What's the story? The guy who just remember the story. The guy who ate a lot of food. There was some guy who was going to some tzaddik, some big mystic saw that there was a certain guy who was going to have a great portion of the world to come. And he went to see what that guy does. And the guy didn't seem anything special. So
He saw you that same, he would like, was a partner with him in the table. I don't know. Just want to see who it was. I don't know.
yep. So the addition that I was told is that he saw that in the world to come, he saw that this guy was going to be at the same table as him in the world to come. So he said, wow, this guy must be really special. So he went to go find him. And he comes, he sees the guy's a regular guy, and he sees, tries to observe him. He sees for breakfast, the guy is eating, 2 loaves of bread and a dozen eggs and whatever he's doing. He's just eating a lot. And then lunch and stuff. He's always eating and having meat and just, working out. And he didn't, it's like, okay, he may be a hidden tzaddik, but like, this doesn't look like it. So he asked the guy, I noticed you eat, what's going on? So he said that my father was a very, very frail guy. And when the anti-Semites came into the shtetl to attack the Jewish people, with one blow, they knocked out my father. And I couldn't believe it, because my father was somebody who served Hashem. He was always davening and always learning. And how could such a thing happen? So I said, I'm not going to allow somebody to knock over the Jewish people. If we are Hashem's children, I'm not going to allow that. So therefore, I'm eating to make sure that I'm extremely strong. And I want to make sure that if anyone comes to attack the Jewish people, I'll be out on the front lines and I'm going to go and defend the Jewish people. So we see over there that this guy, for him, this is what he was doing. So you see the preciousness of a neshama. Even a guy who looks like he's just eating and working out, but the reason behind it was a godly reason. Now, I'm not saying that we should all go and become gluttonous and eat a lot and go work out all day. There's other things that we have to do in life. But it's just bringing out the concept that what we see superficially and externally is not really what goes on the deeper inside of the soul. And this leads us to the end of chapter 2. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I have a question.
Yes.
What's the difference between a Jewish soul and a non-Jewish soul?
That's a great question. What? Don't be scared. Any questions that you're allowed to ask. The difference is the regular soul